the moon and its symbolism and meaning in the real world, and why it's important to know these things for the mystery that I've been talking about in the past two videos. So, from 1955 to 1975 was the space race between mainly two different nations, the United States and the USSR. Uh, in 1969, the US finally landed a man on the moon. But in that time from 1955 to 1969, and also a few years after, these two nations were basically obsessed over the moon, practically worshiping it in a sense. They did everything in their power to finally get onto the moon, finally see what all the fuss was about, um, crunching all the numbers to overcome the impossible, and get to something that for the longest time was just something you could see in the sky but could never touch. And now they finally touched it. And, we may never know what they actually found on the moon. So, uh, yeah, as far as going back to worshiping the moon, in many different mythologies and religions in many different countries, there's been a lot of different moon goddesses and gods. For example, um, we have Selene, the Greek goddess of the moon. We have Luna, the Roman goddess of the moon. And we have Chang'e, Chang'e, um, the Chinese goddess of the moon. So these three are just pure representations of the moon. But there's also been other mythologies and also parts of the same mythology that have gods and goddesses that have some aspect based on the moon, but also some other traits as well, or symbols, representations. We have Hecate, the Greek goddess of the moon, nature, wildlife, hunting, and sudden death. Then, let me repeat those last two again: hunting and sudden death alongside the moon. So something to think about that. Why? Why did Greek mythology lump in the moon and sudden death like that? We also have Artemis, a popular Greek goddess who represented the moon, witchcraft, necromancy, and ghosts. All those things lumped together with the moon. Witchcraft, necromancy, and ghosts. So, some aspect of the supernatural, which is actually something I'll talk about in this video, actually. Uh, um, we also have Isis, who is the Egyptian goddess of uh, the moon and rain, but also in some circles, she was claimed to have formed the cosmos from her own hands. So she essentially has literally universal power. And this is just a goddess that represents the moon. So, they really thought the moon had this sort of universal cosmic power, which is something to think about. Um, we also have Khonsu, Egyptian god of the moon, another Egyptian god of the moon. Also, the name, um, this is not Khonsu. Sorry. Wait, no, this is, yes. Khonsu, Egyptian god of the moon. But also, the name Khonsu means traveler, relating to the passage of the moon as it travels at night, which is a reoccurring theme as we talked about in these past few videos, the passage of the moon in the night sky. And alongside that, he also marked the passage of time, along with the other god that I thought this guy was Thoth, or yeah, Thoth, or yeah, um, who is also the Egyptian god of the moon, but also wisdom, writing, hieroglyphs, science, magic, art, and judgment. All those different things alongside the moon. Literally, like, they gave him so much power over the way people think, which in the last video I talked about some symbolisms of some symbols representing the moon are the subconscious mind, which this seems to go off of. So, some things to think about, and um, yeah, I'd like to read an excerpt I found on Encyclopedia Britannica about lunar moon worship. The moon is viewed in terms of the rhythmic life of the cosmos and is believed to govern all vital change. Association of the moon with the land of the dead. Remember, one of the goddesses had stuff about necromancy and ghosts. Um, the place to which souls ascend after death, and the power of rebirth. So the moon is tied with rebirth. Again, necromancy, but also something connected yet separate to necromancy. Yes, and there's also association of the moon with fate, which has some religious ties too. The 3 days of darkness, the period when it disappears can be tied to the 3 days of darkness in the lunar cycle and eclipses. That like it emphasizes those disappearances, such as the moon disappearing as a result of battles between some monster. This is reading this word for word from the excerpt. The result of battles between some monster who devours or slays the moon and who subsequently regurgitates or revives it. So, in my last video, I've talked about how there's entities tied to the moon, and this seems to be going off of that as well. There's an entity tied to the moon, although in this case it's actively hostile to the moon. And I'd like to end off my religion aspect of this by talking about one last moon god, Sin, in the Mesopotamian religions, who is here depicted as a moon. But I found him pretty interesting because I did some research and I found a journal called Traces of the Worship of the Moon God Sin among the early Israelites. And it talked about, worship of the moon god Sin. The god was honored in the form of a golden calf with crescent-shaped horns and a long flowy beard of lapis lazuli. Now, pretty much everything in this expert is not that important, but what is important is this phrase right here, lapis lazuli, because this is finally a tie between theories of the moon in the real world and its connection to why it all started in Minecraft. Because if you haven't seen the mystery, this whole thing started from a corrupted world in Minecraft, um, and the connection right here. If you saw my the Google Doc I wrote up for my iceberg, there was illager in woodland mansions. Illagers in woodland mansions had a cult. Well, besides how lapis lazuli is used in enchanting tables, so obviously it has magical properties. Illagers also sought to use them in their woodland mansion cults. Put inside illager heads, which is tied to a necromancy, and bringing things to life. Um, because the illager heads right now are not alive; they're made of wool, but these illagers thought putting lapis lazuli in the heads would, possibly bring them to life as sentinels or constructs. So think about these ties between lapis lazuli from the moon god in real life to Minecraft, because I think this is important. I think um, this is our next step forward. Besides the whole agent of the moon stuff, which speaking of which, I I want to show you. Look at this picture of the moon, and tell me. Excuse me. I had an empty stomach. I want you to look at this moon and tell me if you see any shape in this moon. You have the light spots, you have the dark spots. Do you see anything that stands out to you about this? And if you know what I'm talking about, you don't have to see it. But if you know nothing about what I'm talking about, can you find any shape hidden in this moon? And you probably can. It looks like nothing. However, apparently the most popular interpretation is that it looks like a rabbit. You have the ears here, the head, and then it kind of curves here to give the appearance of a rabbit. Just the problem is, how did so many people interpret this as a rabbit? Because going to the Wikipedia article, the moon rabbit legend is popular and part of local folklore throughout Asia, found in diverse cultures in China, Japan, India, Korea, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar. Also, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Cree all saw rabbits in the moon. So how did so many countries and religions and cultures see the same animal and made religions about not religion, I made mythologies about the same animal, unless they were told this by the representative of the moon, the agent of the moon, which leads me to the theory I've been thinking about for the past few days, although it's not a theory that's very important. I just would help me find this agent better once I um because I think the agent takes on the form of a rabbit. I think if you were to seek out the agent, the reason why no one's seen it before is because it just takes on the form of a rabbit, and you only know where to look if you were to seek out these rabbits. Um, Seek out a rabbit. And I've been rewinding the video with the entity in the Endstone world, and I think it does very closely resemble this sort of rabbit shape right here, and um, uh, uh, yeah, and that's the link I had. Um, I like to talk about one more thing about the whole influence the moon has on myths and legends, and uh, like for example, we have werewolves, vampires, and witches um, in popular um, culture, who all either gain their powers from the moon or can only thrive under the moon's light or become stronger because of the moon's light, which does show that the moon has this sort of supernatural property of transformation or strengthening or sustaining life, which ties back to the other things we've been talking about in these past few slides. But the thing is, like, if you see here, moonlight is not its own thing. The moon does not emit light, unless it does, of course, um, which would go off of it being a supernatural object. But if you want to go based on what we know purely about science, it's just reflected sunlight. The sunlight hits the moon. That's why part of the moon is bright and the other isn't, which explains the phases of the moon. And then that moonlight is reflected onto Earth. So why is moonlight so inherently powerful and sunlight is just its own thing? Unless something were to happen in the interaction here, some sort of scientific interaction between the sunlight and the surface of the moon that gives moonlight these inherent properties. And the agent of the moon might have something to do with this. I've talked about pinpoint lights, how the lights converge, and how that's important. I think this has something to do with converging lights. I've been looking at it for a while, and I've been collecting some information. I think Yeah. So I want to end by going back to what I've been talking about with the space race, because I've been looking at a list of moon launches and moon expeditions, and you can see right here, for 4 years from 2014 to 2018, we've done nothing. But then, all of a sudden, we've had this whole boom of rocket launches to the moon. So what caused this whole, where we're worshiping the moon again? What caused this sudden return to worshiping the moon? Which makes me think that, these people here know something that we don't. There's a reason they're going back to the moon, either to, converse with the moon's agents, or find the supernatural properties inherent on the moon, and maybe they've been following their information of their own on this mystery, and this is the only way to progress forward by doing these um, rocket launches. Because 2018 might have been around 2018 might have been the day that the post was written, because it did seem like a fairly old post. But I know where to go next. I Yeah, I've been going outside for these past few days, looking figuring out the moon's location, how it's expanding. I've tracked the location of the agent to a specific spot, not far from here, which I don't think is a coincidence. It's I'm the only person that's fucking talking about this, and the fact that it's so close to my place. Me. So I'll record another video once I find this agent, and I'll talk more in depth about it once I find its location. And I'm just fine. I'm just glad to finally continue the mystery after so long of just not finding any clues or leads. So, thank you.